every time we hear smart city, every time we hear smart community, it should enter to our mind that it is a community, or it is one where all sectors, not only the government, not only the residents, all sectors, the businesses included, should collaborate, should practice openness, as you've mentioned, open dialogue, and of course, fairness as well in using data, in using technologies to really achieve at the end of the day, we want a better quality of life for everyone, and we want sustainability.
Hello, smart community friends, and welcome to 2022. This is our first episode of new content in 2022, and I am absolutely so excited to bring a very special guest back onto the podcast to start us off. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a great conversation with Kris Libunao, the Executive Director and Chief Sustainability Officer of SmartCT, improving the way smart cities and digital transformation are being developed in the Philippines and developing countries. Now, you might remember Kris from back in episode 191, and we are so happy to have her back on the show to catch up on what she's been up to since we last spoke in 2020. Kris starts by telling us about her background in urban planning, policy research, project management, and sustainability. She also tells us about her professional and personal passions and what sparked her interest in smart communities. Kris then tells us what a smart community means to her and what she's been doing in developing countries to build smart communities, and discusses the key gaps in operationalising and sustaining smart communities in developing countries. Kris then gives us an update about what she's been up to since 2020 and what 2022 is for her and what she is going to focus on. And she also discusses how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected her projects. We finish our chat discussing the emerging trends of artificial intelligence, or AI, and data science, and the importance of educating the public about data ethics. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Kris. How are you today?
I'm good. How about you? It's been more than a year since the last time we talked.
I know. It's actually a bit crazy. We just went and had a look at when you came on last time. And yeah, September 2020 was when your episode was released. So we would have recorded it earlier that year. So we've been right in the middle of, I want to say, the first wave of the pandemic. And now we're in, I don't know what number, but anyway, we're here now. So yeah, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. So let's jump straight in. Well, excited to have you back on the podcast, I should say. Let's jump straight in, and can you tell us your background and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, so again, hi everyone. Hi Zoe. It's great to be here again. I'm Kris Libunao. I'm the Executive Director of SmartCT. And I am coming in here from the lens of data stewardship, urban planning, project management, and more than a decade of policy consultancies. If you look at my background, really, it is really an intersection among policies, project management, urban planning, and sustainability. And as I've mentioned earlier, I've been a policy consultant for more than a decade. On top of Philippine governments and private companies, I've worked with several developmental projects funded by various international organizations. And I guess that's about it. I guess what am I passionate about? I am passionate about how digital transformation is being done in the government, especially in the local government in developing countries like the Philippines and its cities and communities. Why? Because I believe there are urgent challenges in how things are implemented in developing countries that needs to be addressed, which is the reason why I co-founded the non-governmental organization SmartCT, Basically, an organization based in the Philippines, and we're really in the business of making smart cities open. What else? On the personal side, I guess, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate. I love working out. I used to be an ultra marathoner. That's why I really love walkable cities and communities. I also trained, Muay Thai in Thailand. But now I do a lot of weightlifting. I just started wall climbing last 2021 and I'm enjoying it. So I guess that's basically my background.
Nice. And where are you based now?
Because currently I'm in the Bay Area, so we're near like 20 minutes around San Francisco. So there's a lot of walkable like area to jog around. But yeah, sadly in the Philippines, it's really hard to look for walkable communities.
I think let's start big again, and because we talked in 2020, and it's interesting talking to people back on when they come back on the podcast. What's changed, thinking's changed, or, whether it's the same but more mature or whatever the case is. What is a smart community to you?
Yeah, good thing you mentioned that, because I was like looking at my notes last 2020. I was like, man, I should have said this, I should have said that. But yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to, I guess, expound on what I've mentioned last 2020. So what really sparked my interest in smart communities, frankly, what really sparked me right now is basically frustration, I guess. It's basically frustration. More than 80% of digital projects really fail in developing world. And there's a lot of reasons why it failed, which international development organizations already cited. For example, limited funding, lack of implementation capacity, and political instability, among others. And sadly, I always believe in the power of technology. But as, the famous saying, I guess, the Uncle Ben says in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So our current approach in digital transformation really sparked my interest in smart communities, because it left us with projects that no one really uses, right? And initiatives that the smart community doesn't really ask for. And basically, this is where I am coming from. I realize where I am coming from. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think it's interesting to think about, even 2016, what we were talking about back then, and we were going to implement this, that, and the other. Well, the world was implementing this, that, and what we were trying to work out what that was, and it meant different things to different people, but very tech centric. Oh, we need this, this, and this in our cities. And it's interesting now to see some of those projects come to life, or were coming to life, and now they're being measured and monitored, and some of them didn't work how we thought they were going to, but some of them have, and in different ways. And also, I think the intersection, like you were talking about earlier, of your background, of it's not just about, and this is fairly obvious now, but it's not just about, okay, well, here's this project here, community, you can have it now. It's about the right policy. It's about the right planning. And these are very kind of basic things that aren't new, but it has to incorporate new ways of thinking, because things have changed so significantly since when we were first starting to kind of think about this. And I think those really old concepts too are coming back into, I don't want to say fashion or trend, but becoming more relevant again, right? Because people realize, okay, so we've gone through this spike of, convenience of, tech and whatever, but then that underlying, reliance on technology is there. So therefore it's become a human right to have connectivity, right? And we still haven't got that yet for everybody. We don't have clean water for everybody, let alone technology. But those things, I think those utilities, and that's what we should think of them as, not as this luxury item, really needs to come to the front, I think. And I think that's where the conversations I've been having over these years, and you would as well, have gone. And I think particularly in developing countries too, we don't want to be talking about autonomous vehicles when people are going, I can't even connect to the internet,
I can't even eat.
Yeah, I can't even eat. Even more, I don't even have basic things. So how can you talk to me about smart when I don't have these basic things? So really keen to hear your thoughts around, what you're doing in developing countries and how that is different. And I think we had this, I remember talking about this last time, but yeah, be really keen to hear your thoughts in 2022.
Yeah, so from the last time we talked, there are a lot of developments in the country, especially on the national level and on the regional level. In fact, we now have smart city frameworks based on the Association of Southeast Asian Nation, or ASEAN. So we do have the ASEAN framework. And on the national level, the National Economic Development Authority of the Philippines also announced that there will be three smart city master plans that will be released pretty soon. But, on top of this, however, there's a lot of work in terms of how can you really implement it on the local level. I really believe that the local governments, the cities, communities, municipalities, towns are uniquely positioned to play a great role in governing, in embracing smart communities, in embracing smart technologies, in embracing data, not only because they are I think not only because they are more nimble and more flexible than the national governments, but also if you think about it, local governments, the cities, the communities, the towns are really the ones who are directly responsible for the welfare of the community, of the people itself. Thus, I feel like the smart community concept is being embraced in the Philippines. It's being embraced in developing countries, but operationalizing it and sustaining it on the ground is a different story altogether. And I believe this is where the challenge and I guess the opportunities lie, really.
What do you think the key factors are or the key gaps, I suppose, that are like not being able to fill, like why it's such a challenge? What are those gaps, you reckon?
That's a really good question because currently I agree with you. You mentioned earlier that when we talk about smart communities, the first thing that will enter our mind mostly are technologies, right? Our data, technologies, and such. And we don't think about how can we really sustain this particular data projects, this particular technology projects. So for me, there are three gaps that I always see in the developing world. First is the data problem. Currently, if you look at the Philippines, we do have a national data portal. But on the local level, the data management, the open data sets that we have or the lack thereof is there. So we do not have local open data portals. And that's what they don't realize, that even if you acquire a technology, if your data management is not there, it will not work for you, really. So that's the first one. The second one, a challenge in developing countries is, as you've mentioned earlier, everything is too technology centered. They focus on the supply of the technologies. They focus on the supply of the data, so to speak, but they don't really focus on the demand of the people and the capacity of the people. So that's another one that I see a huge gap, especially in developing countries. As you've mentioned earlier, case on point is that we started talking about AI, but then again, the general public, the general citizens doesn't really understand what is AI, what are the risks of AI, what are the benefits of AI can bring. So the buy-in is not there. And third is that our public sector, not only the public is not capacitated, but the public sector as well. In terms of like sustaining the technology project, of course, for example, they will acquire technologies. But how can the public sector sustain it? Can they run it on their own? Do they have a digital team to sustain it, to update it? Or they will rely to the outsourced technology that they acquire? So those are basically the three gaps. So data, the data problem. Second would be the capacity of the public. And third would be the capacity of the public sector themselves.
Yeah, I think skill sets are key. Well, all three of those are really key. But interestingly, I think the skill set issue is not just the developing countries, but it's, in Australia, we have the same issue, particularly within the public sector. But it is changing, and there's more data skills, but that pipeline of people that have the skill sets it's not there yet, I think. And I think also it's going to be interesting to see, there's, people who have data skills, there's IT skills, there's those type of things, but those smart community skills of somebody that has like an understanding of, say, local government or business or whatever the case is, and then on top of that have data skills. I think that's where this mix of people is going to be really interesting. And it's not to say that that person needs to do all the data, the analytics or whatever, but to be able to understand enough to be able to ask the right questions, get the right insights, all those type of things to be able to make decisions. So I think what I see is like when we're talking about, okay, tell me this one answer, you actually need someone to continually be thinking about what else could I know, or what else could help me? What else could if I had the data to make this decision, what would I do with that information? Or, what if I did know? What if I did know this? Could I be able to make better decisions for my community? And I think that will be really interesting to see, and really has to be invested in, by the government, even by the community, like to kind of buy into this whole thing that data is going to really help us make better decisions. Because I think one of the biggest things these days is, and I think I've said this on the podcast many times, but it's like we make all these decisions already, but we're lacking the data. So it's not that like now we're going to make different decisions or like these amazing decisions that, we don't have to make now. We need to make them now, but we're lacking the data and information. So it's just about making better decisions rather than more and more. So I think when people think data and big data, it might be a bit overwhelming, confusing. But can't we just keep doing what we're doing? But we're already making those decisions, but we just need to make them better. And if we can make them better, we should make them better. And I think that's where it's like an imperative that we start to really have better conversations about this stuff and get more people involved.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like the really big question is how can we really reach the everyday citizens, right? On what this particular data, on what this particular like critical technologies is, or so that they would understand the limitations, so they would understand the benefits, what can they do about it, what can they not do about it, and really understand the various ethical and responsibilities that they have in terms of using this data and technologies.
Yeah, and I think also when potentially at the beginning when we're talking about smart cities, we had this really tech positive focus and everything was like, oh no, we'll work that out, or, we're not talking about the issues because no, we want to get this project over the line or whatever the case is. Whereas now I think if we as smart community professionals come in with this open mindset and not even open mindset, just like this honest kind of open dialogue that this isn't perfect. This is the world. This is still life, right? And so we're going to have to make decisions, and some of them we can't please everyone all of the time, but we can bring the community and bring the citizens in to be able to design this together. But also realizing that, yes, there are risks. There are risks in every single project that we do, no matter if it's a smart city one or whatever. And we need to build that trust with the community to go, okay, these people, these professionals, they're working with us, they're engaging us. We trust them to be able to make these decisions, and we know that it's not going to be 100% perfect. We're going to work it out together. And I think when we bring that type of approach in, that's when we can get real traction, that it's not just going to be, oh, cool, well, we'll implement this and this and all your problems will be solved. So I think that was nearly the dialogue at the very beginning, and not intentionally either. It was like unintentional. But I think that's where we can really have these conversations, because whenever I talk about, technology and this stuff, people go, oh, well, you must be all pro tech and, you must have Google Home and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, nah, like the biggest thing is to ask the right questions, continually asking questions about technology, so then we can really build in what we want it to be, rather than just accepting that approach or that, I guess, level of service, because we want to be able to understand what we're giving away and the service that we're getting in return.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that, it's a continuous dialogue. It's an open dialogue, because I believe that this is what like openness and collaboration is really what a smart community is about. And I also agree that currently when we hear about smartness or smart, it's quite vague. And we always think about that it's just about technology. But really, we should think about smartness as not a binary kind of thing, that it's not a yes or no variable wherein, okay, if we say that this particular community or this particular technology is smart, can we conclude that the other technology or the other community is dumb? So it's not really that. And I agree with you. It's where the continuity and openness enters, wherein we should see it that smartness really is a continuous variable on how the community uses data and on how the community uses technology for its own benefit. And going back to, so we talk about the smartness, going back. So what does, a community means then? Like for me, community means what you've mentioned, what you've highlighted earlier, openness, the openness in terms of the dialogue, the openness in terms of how you collaborate with each other. So for me, every time we hear smart city, every time we hear smart community, it should enter to our mind that it is a community, or it is one where all sectors, not only the government, not only the residents, all sectors, the businesses included, should collaborate, should practice openness, as you've mentioned, open dialogue, and of course, fairness as well in using data, in using technologies to really achieve at the end of the day, we want a better quality of life for everyone, and we want sustainability. So I guess that should be the starting point every time we talk about smart city, every time we hear about smartness.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, it's been such a great conversation. I really want to go back to 2020, do we want to go back to 2020? I don't know. But so we had a conversation in 2020. It would have been released in September 2020, but we would have had that conversation beforehand. So we're kind of in that pandemic. We're still in that, but at the early stages, what's happening? Where are we going? What's going on?
Pandemic bubble.
Yes. What's changed since then? That's a big question, but how are you since then? What have you been up to since then? What things have you been doing since then?
Well, that's a big question, really. So I'm still the executive director of Smart City. We had a lot of projects that we launched last year in 2021. In 2021, our focus really is connecting with the local government. So that's mainly our focus. How can we connect with them directly? How can we engage with the local governments directly? And there's a lot of learnings as well. So moving forward, what we realize is that, if ever we really want to reach a broader audience, to reach the public, really, to reach the citizens, we should focus on communities. So our plan, I guess, this 2022 is really to focus on building communities instead. So there are few community building efforts in the pipeline for us. We're looking at really honing into building the open source community in the Philippines, which is not that well organized in the country. So we are planning to build FOSS Pilipinas, Free and Open Source Software Pilipinas, which will really organize the open source community. And we're also looking at building Smart Southeast Asia, creating, instead of Smart City as an organization, we're looking at building it as a network instead, but focusing on Southeast Asia. Why we're planning to do that? Because what we notice really is the current existing networks in the Southeast Asian region are quite focused on the government itself. So most of the members are entirely government sector and public sector. And what we want to really focus on, as you've mentioned, open the dialogue. We want to open, the membership even to civic organizations, even to academe too. So they would have a say in terms of this smart cities, in terms of this smart technologies. And I guess this is in line with our vision really, which is to make smart cities and communities open. So this is the major change in the smart city organization. We're really honing in how can you really focus on openness in terms of smart cities.
And how has the pandemic affected what you've been up to? Has it been, much more difficult, or you were able to launch different projects, or did it open up opportunities, or all of the above?
I think there are a lot of silver linings actually because of the pandemic. First, I guess the biggest, silver lining is that now the government is willing to meet with us, online. before, if you're from the Philippines, it's really hard for you to meet with them online because they want you to write a letter. It's very formal, write a letter, ask for an appointment, and, meet with them in person. But now they are really open in terms of meeting with us virtually and even attending events virtually. So for me, there's a lot of like opportunities because of the pandemic itself. Challenges would be, I guess, it would be nice to have like in-person, gatherings. It's a very different dynamic, but we work it out and, we see this as an opportunity rather than a challenge.
Yeah. I think, and were you traveling a lot before the pandemic back to the Philippines?
Yeah. There's a lot of like canceled, I have to move all my flights and all and cancel the flights that I planned to. And hopefully, 2022 would be different and I will be able to go back to the Philippines soon.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed for you.
How about you?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I haven't even looked, but I've got lots of credit of flights in
That's nice.
somewhere. I don't know. I have to go have a look again. And like my passport actually expired in 2020. And I was like, oh, and I've just renewed it now, so I'm ready to travel again. But again, like we were just saying, I think before on the pre-chat, we're still in this, right? We're still in this pandemic. It's still going. 2022. Hopefully, it's different, but it's going to be an interesting ride, and we'll just see what happens. And things are changing hourly. I mean, even in Australia at the moment, we're going through a different, like a peak and a spike in all different times of things, and it's still changing on the very regular basis. So
I really miss like in-person meeting, in-person gathering.
Me too.
I'm an introvert, but I realized, okay, I think I need some in-person meetings every now and then.
Yeah, I'm the same. Well, I'm an extrovert, so I'm just like, I need people, bring me people. But fortunately, we've been quite fortunate here in Queensland to date to be able to, there's been lockdowns and things, but I've been able to kind of schedule my life to get that in person, kind of contact as well and go down and do that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting coming out. And even like when we first came out of the lockdowns or whatever,
First wave.
the first wave or whatever wave it was, it's like, it's even a different experience. You kind of nearly forget how to interact socially.
True. That's true. It's like, okay.
Oh, that's right. Okay, cool. Yep. Small talk. Because you don't have small talk on digital, right?
Yeah. And everything is like used to like, it's like 6 meter gap or something like that.
Oh,
like
6 foot
everyone's
gap,
like, 6 foot gap. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and yeah, then sometimes you forget you're in a pandemic, and then all of a sudden something happens. You're like, oh, that's right. Yeah, we're in a global pandemic, people. Like, okay,
Part of the history.
yes, we are living it now. Okay, let's zoom to the future now, and what are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
That's really a good question. I was thinking about it. I think most of the emerging trends that are currently, out there is being already talked about. I don't know if, like AI, NFT, I don't know, blockchain and stuff. So especially AI, I feel like artificial intelligence has become quite a buzzword, and data science as well. However, I think since we are talking about smart community, what we always missed, as I've mentioned earlier, is educating the general public. We really need to look for the balance between this growing and emerging, trends, emerging technology, this supply of data and technology talents, and, look for the solutions and consumption, of course, of this data and critical technologies like AI. Meaning, I feel like there's still a need for ethical deployments. There's still a need for responsible deployments and acquisition of products and services. And of course, on top of that, there's also a need for intelligent consumption of the general public. So I feel like that's really it. Like, there's a lot of supply, there's a lot of trends going out there, but no one is really dealing with the consumption. How is this consumed by the general public and being deployed?
Yeah, I think like data ethics and that type of thing is a trend, and it shouldn't even like not a trend necessarily, but something that people are talking more and more about, which is great because we need that, and we need people to be able to be working in this space that have both that skill set to be able to ask those questions and dig deeper, but then also have that ethical lens. And it's not just about technology and what we can do. It's not, just because we can, should we kind of questions and that type of thing. And even just being able to have someone asking those questions, I think is really important. And I think a lot of young people do that quite well, because they go, why are we doing it like this? I think having people like that in a team or whoever just like questioners are really key to get a better result. Because I think before, I don't know, when I experienced this, it was always like, oh, why are you asking so many questions? Like, it's like you're a troublemaker, you like, just let it go. But I think now it's a bit more like, oh, okay, yes, if I'm asking this, other people are going to be asking this. So what's the answer? And it might not be that we change anything, but we can think about it and we can make sure that we do have an answer to that question, or that we go, oh, actually we don't know, so let's go and find out, or let's do things differently to be able to do better. Because at the end of the day, like you said earlier, it's about quality of life for people. And if we can't answer the questions of the people, then we really need to be thinking about that, particularly answering them in a way that in language that they actually understand as well is really key and really important. And I think if you get those questions in early, then it's not a shock or a surprise once they come in later as well. And we've got the answers. So I think those things are really important when we are building these communities, building these projects with the community as well, because as we were talking about earlier, it's not binary. It's not just like, this is all good, so, everything's going to happen exactly how we want it to, and you're going to be great, and we're going to high five at the end. Hopefully we still high five at the end, but there's going to be so many risks and things that will happen, and then we need to be able to shift and change and move through it. So yeah, I think that's a really key trend to talk about. And I think it's going to be more and more because people are going to have better questions, which is going to be great. And we're going to be able to then have better answers for that.
I also hope so, because it's not as sexy as, just looking at apps. You go to the government, okay, and you have this particular app, the buy-in is there already. But if you talk about, educating the public and such, it's not as, tangible as, this particular products. But yeah, I agree with you. I hope, I don't, as you've mentioned, I don't want to call it a trend as well. I hope that this will be part of the decision making, that we are more cautious about this in terms of deploying, in terms of acquisition of particular technologies and such.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, Kris, it's been so great to chat with you again, and I am so grateful that you could come back onto the podcast. I always love talking with you, and I think we need to do it more often. And hopefully one day we can meet in real life. In
person and high five in person.
And high five in person in a safe way. But it's been so great to chat with you, and congratulations on all the fantastic work you've been doing. I've been following along over the last, since we've been talking, but I cannot believe it was over a year ago.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy. So thanks again for coming onto the podcast. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you do next, because I think it's such an important space, and we really need people focusing on not just, the developed countries, but the developing countries, and doing it in a way that's right for them as well, because we know that each community is unique and each community is different. So it's been great to chat with you again.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really looking forward to meet with you in person. Hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon. Just one last question. How can people connect with you?
Oh, yeah. So you can look for me in LinkedIn. I think my handle is Kris VL. Then I have a website as well. It's www.krisvl.com. But I'm transferring to the smartivist.com. So you can check me out on there as well. And I have a Twitter. My Twitter handle is Kris on this. And I think that's basically it. For the website of my organization, it's smartct.org. And another one that I want to promote is where I'm the one of the board of trustees is mimpact.org. So mimpact.org. So I think that's it.
Cool. We'll put all the links in the show notes so people can click away and find you. Thank you again for coming back onto the podcast, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Zoe.
Bye.
Are you looking for an engaging speaker, MC, or facilitator for your next big event? Then we've got you covered. Zoe is a go-to speaker, MC, and conversation facilitator with a difference. She's a master at simplifying the complex and making connections you might never see. Book Zoe for your next event. Email hello@mysmart.community or head over to her speaker page, www.mysmart.community/speaking.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.